Thank you all so much for joining us for this, what is it, our fourth conversation on L.M. Montgomery. Today we welcome Carolyn Strom Collins. She is a noted scholar of L.M. Montgomery. She has worked in many areas of research on Montgomery. First of all, probably most of us would know Carolyn from her the Anne of Green Gables Treasury and other Anne companion books, which she authored for Penguin Canada. She's done several other of those companion books, which are awesome, including Little Women's Secret Garden and the Little House books. Her most recent publication is Anne of Green Gables, the original manuscript, in which we can actually follow Montgomery's creative writing process as she put together the manuscript and edited it for publication. I highly recommend it. In 2016, Carolyn published 3 volumes with the L.M. Montgomery Institute at the University of Prince Edward Island. They are excellent reference materials. One is a guide to L.M. Montgomery's story and poem scrapbooks, 1890 through 1942. An annotated bibliography of L.M. Montgomery's stories and poems, which is an update from the 1986 bibliography by Rhea Wilmshurst. And after many years, 21 long-lost stories by L.M. Montgomery, which was republished in 2017 by Nimbus in Canada. She has chapters and articles in many publications, including the Lucy Maud Montgomery album, Storm and Dissonance, L.M. Montgomery and Conflict. And she has also, and I think this is available, and Carolyn can correct me if I'm wrong, she scripted and narrated a virtual tour of L.M. Montgomery's Prince Edward Island with photography by Bernadetta Milewski, which we got to enjoy at the 2020 virtual L.M. Montgomery International Conference. 2 of her presentations are available online at the Journal of L.M. Montgomery Studies. The first is Envisioning Anne of Green Gables, How L.M. Montgomery Created a Classic, and Cutting and Pasting, What L.M. Montgomery's Island Scrapbooks Reveal About Her Reading. She founded the L.M. Montgomery Literary Society, which is based in Minnesota, in 1991, has written many articles for its annual e-newsletter, and you can catch up with them on Facebook. And she was honored to receive in 2020 the Legacy Award from the L.M. Montgomery Institute at University of Prince Edward Island for her contributions to the world of L.M. Montgomery. So we are very pleased to welcome Carolyn with us, to have her with us today. Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Caroline. Very nice to see you and to hear from you. I'd also like to thank Ben Lefebvre and Andrea McKenzie for inviting me to participate in today's conversation and for their help in producing the discussion. I'm going to show slides that we'll be happy to answer questions after the slides are completed. First up is the title page, An Archive of Her Own, L.M. Montgomery's Scrapbooks and Other Records. Okay, Ben, you can change the slide to the to the second one. L.M. Montgomery was a consummate record keeper. From detailed journals that she kept over 50 years of her life, as well as letters to fellow writers Ephraim Weber and George Boyd Macmillan. The journals and most of her letters have been published. All give us many insights into her daily life as well as her professional life. She also left hundreds of photographs showing places in Prince Edward Island, Ontario, and even England that give us an idea of the spots that meant something to her. Also included in the collection are family photos, and photos of items that she would eventually include in her stories, such as her china dogs, Gog and Magog, and the jug in the tangled web. The photos are part of the Ella Montgomery collection at Guelph University in Ontario. Thank you. Two valuable records are her price record books, also known as her ledger lists. One contains records of her novel and the amounts of royalties that were paid to her. And the other contains lists of her stories and poems, again, with how much she was paid for most of them. These are also part of the collection at Guelph. And there are her scrapbooks, many scrapbooks. 12 scrapbooks contain copies of published stories and poems, beginning in 1890 with her earliest published composition on Cape La Force, and continuing with essays and poems from her college years. And then her first nationally published story, A Baking of Ginger Snaps. That was published in 1895. She continued pasting clippings of her stories and poems from hundreds of periodicals in these 12 scrapbooks until 1940. The 12 original scrapbooks are kept in Confederation Center archives in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, and are on display at the Ella Montgomery birthplace in New London, Prince Edward Island, in tourist season. In the 1960s, Rhea Wilmshurst discovered the pile of scrapbooks in a corner of a room in Montgomery's birthplace in New London. Rhea was thrilled to find they contained so much more material that she had not known about, in addition to her novel, of course. She asked for permission to photograph the scrapbooks and proceeded to begin documenting the stories and poems in them. Although Montgomery had pasted the clippings into her scrapbooks, she didn't always record where and when they had been published. Rhea did this, and the results were published in Ella Montgomery, a preliminary bibliography, in 1986. Rhea then began publishing some of the stories, beginning with Akin to Anne. Eventually, she would publish 7 more volumes of stories before her death in 1996. After Rhea's bibliography came out, several independent scholars began to look for the stories and poems that Rhea was unable to find. In the process, we found hundreds more citations, and in 2016, an updated bibliography of stories and poems was published by UPEI. 21 stories were found along the way, stories that had not been seen since their original publication. These stories were published in 2017 by Nimbus Publishing as After Many Years. If Montgomery had not kept a record of her publishing in scrapbooks and ledger lists, it is unlikely we would have known the extent of her impressive volume of work. Over 500 stories and over 500 poems. There are still stories and poems to be found, and the team is on the lookout for them. Ben and I found at least 2 more since the 21 long lost volume was published. Thank you. Montgomery kept other kinds of scrapbooks in addition to the 12 filled with stories and poems. 2 I want to discuss today are known as her island scrapbooks. They contain mementos, miscellaneous clippings, souvenirs, and the like. The blue one, on the left, included items from about 1893 to 1897. The red one included items from the late 1890s to 1910. There are a few items that date from earlier years, as we shall see. Montgomery wrote 2 journal entries about these scrapbooks, a lengthy one on 30th of July, 1905, about the blue one, saying it seemed to hold the jest and merriment for those old days. And then on the 22nd of November, 1926, the entry tells of items mostly in the red scrapbook, such as wedding notices, a memory of sending in her handwriting to be analyzed, and the copy of the poem that inspired her all of her life, The Fringed Gentian. These island scrapbooks are kept at the Confederation Center archives and displayed at the Ella Montgomery birthplace during the tourist season. Other Montgomery scrapbooks compiled when she lived in Ontario are part of the collection at the Guelph University Archives. In 2008, Dr. Elizabeth Epperly published Imagining Anne, showing most of the pages from the two island scrapbooks. It was reprinted by Nimbus in 2019. Betsy added notes identifying many of the personal items, cards, souvenirs, programs, etc., using information from Montgomery's journals, letters, and articles to explain their significance. As soon as my friend Christy Worcester saw a copy of Imagining Anne, she began to find information on some of the clippings that Montgomery cut out and pasted on the pages as decoration or for inspiration. Christy wrote up her findings of about 25 items in the 2008 online edition of The Shining Scroll, which you can find online. After Christy died a few years ago, I decided to continue her search for the origins of as many of those clippings as I could find. I discovered that Montgomery had access to dozens of periodicals, magazines, newspapers, and floral catalogs. Let's have a look at some of the pages from the scrapbooks with an eye to identifying some of those clippings from the periodicals in which Montgomery found them. On page 1 of the blue scrapbook, we find 3 souvenirs that Montgomery pasted on this page. They were gifts from friends. The Youth's Companion calendar seems to have come from Alec, a friend from Prince of Wales College. The horseshoe was a shoe buckle from Selena Robinson, a teacher in Cavendish that Montgomery became friends with. And the glove-shaped calendar from Ruel Pritchard, a friend from her year in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. The dried flower stems are not identified. Well, I wondered where the decorative pieces came from, and after a good bit of searching, I discovered where. The cutouts of the pink and yellow gladioli and the strawberries came from a floral catalog from John Lewis Child's Company in New York. More cutouts from Child's catalogs are found throughout the scrapbooks. On the right is the page from the 1895 Child's catalog from which Montgomery clipped the stems of gladioli. The page from the same catalog that shows the cluster of strawberries, notice that Montgomery did not clip the raspberries in the glass of what might be raspberry cordial for her scrapbook. On page 3 of the blue scrapbook, we find another cutout from the cover of the 1893 Child's catalog. We also see 2 fancy cards, they're called, with the floral motif, cards with pressed flowers, and a scrap of wood, mementos of college days. A clipping of a poem entitled In the Portrait Gallery, in the center of the page, by May Lennox, was in the Ladies' Home Journal, January 1893. And there are clippings from local newspapers. The sketch of the girl sitting on the crescent moon near the top of the page was from an advertisement for Crescent bicycles from the Youth's Companion, the 26th of April, 1894. See that page on the right. The cover of the April 1893 Ladies' Home Journal provided the sketch of the girl in the diaphanous gown on page 18 of the blue scrapbook. And the large pink rose came from, again, the 1895 Child's catalog. A clipping of a poem entitled The First Song Sparrow in the center of the page by Lucy Larcom is from the Youth's Companion, the 14th of February, 1895. Other items on this page include 2 cards with pressed flowers from outings, a cartoon entitled Bashful from Judge's Library, October 1894, a greeting card, and 2 clippings from local newspapers. This is one of my favorite pages. Yellow pansy on page 18 of the red scrapbook caught my eye, and I wondered if it might have inspired the comment in chapter 17 of Anne of Green Gables, in which Anne is returning to school and the girls give her little gifts. May McPherson gave her an enormous yellow pansy cut from the pages of a floral catalog, a species of desk decoration highly prized in Avonlea School, unquote. I hope to find that catalog someday. The photo, the blue cyanotype, is of Cavendish School. There are 2 write-ups about Cavendish School. A joke about a funny little tail pasted under the squirrel's tail that Montgomery mentions in her journal entry in July 1905. And there's an anonymous poem entitled 20 Years Ago, mentioning the old schoolhouse. So you can see the motif on this page is mostly about school. Many more pages contain cutouts from the John Lewis Childs Floral Catalog. I found at least 11 catalogs from 1893 to 1904 represented. These pages show a few of the cutouts. In addition to the colorful cutouts, Montgomery also clipped pictures from newspapers and magazines of cats. This is page 35 of the red scrapbook. These I found came from the Ladies' Home Journal, November 1899 and November 1902, and the Ladies' World, August 1910. That one is the kitten being held in the hand to represent Packer's parcel. She also saved bits of fur from her own cats, tied them to cards, and pasted them on several pages of her scrapbooks. This one, down near the bottom of the page, is from her cat, Bob's. We also find a greeting card and Montgomery's own photo, a cyanotype, of the backyard of the McNeil home in Cavendish. She also clipped pictures from ads. This one on page 27 of the blue scrapbook was from an ad for Fry's Cocoa in the Illustrated London News, 21st November 1891. That was 2 years before she started the scrapbook, so she clearly kept things in a drawer or a box somewhere for future reference. Also on this page are 2 cards with notes from school days, one with a 4-leaf clover mentioned in her July 1905 journal entry, a clipping of a poem entitled Her Bonnet by Mary E. Wilkins, clipping entitled A Literary Curiosity with poems Cleopatra Dying and an Anthony and Cleopatra, and a clipping from a local paper. Another ad on the inside back cover from the blue scrapbook advertising soap was in the Ladies' Home Journal, May 1896. Other items on this page include 3 photos of Western Canada from a set of Canadian National Railway cards. Cutout of sweet peas, cutouts of a bride and a young woman with a lasso encircling a photo of film star Loretta Young. This is possibly a little joke, as Laura Pritchard Agnew's wedding announcement is pasted on the young woman's skirt. There's no information about the card with a painting of an Asian man in a garden of hollyhocks, but I think it's intriguing that she put it in her scrapbook. Ads on page 1 of the red scrapbook include the Kodak Girl from the Ladies' Home Journal, June 1891. You remember how Montgomery bought her own Kodak and made lots of pictures. There's an ad for Quaker Oats entitled The Grocer's Smile. It's from Ladies' Home Journal, February 1903. Other items on the page include 3 oval portraits from the Delineator magazine, September 1902, miscellaneous clippings of anecdotes, a cartoon, and one of Montgomery's cyanotypes picturing the hole in the wall, a sandstone formation at the Cavendish shore. I think the Grocer's Smile cutout may have influenced her comment about the premiere in the chapter of Anne of Green Gables when Marilla comes home and says, "What a nose that man had." The Youth's Companion, Easter, 1894, provided the oval picture on page 2 of the blue scrapbook. Other items on this page include cards with mementos of college days, 2 calling cards from Prince Albert friends, clippings of local interest, and a clipping of a poem entitled My Ship by Lillian Gray, Nothing has been found on this poem to date. It may be the only one in existence. There are other clippings from the front covers of magazines, such as this one on page 5 of the blue scrapbook from Ladies' Home Journal, May 1895. Also on this page are 2 calling cards from college days. One embroidered with PWC 1893-1894. 2 color portraits of young women, a long newspaper report on the Prince of Wales College examinations of July 1893, and 2 clippings of little jokes. The circular photo on page 36 of the red scrapbook came from the cover of the Delineator, February 1903. The baby pictures came from the Ladies' Home Journal, December 1902. Other clippings include a long poem entitled When the Cows Come Home by Agnes Mitchell and 2 small clippings of jokes. The young lady pictured on page 8 of the red scrapbook came from the cover of the Ladies' Home Journal, September 1902. And I think this is one of the first items that Christy Worcester found in her large collection of antique magazines that she recognized as being in Montgomery's scrapbook, and that set her off on her search for more. The fabric circles were probably inspired by pages from different issues of the Delineator that used such circles to illustrate articles on the latest fabrics. It has not been determined where Montgomery obtained these fabrics. I checked her crazy quilt and went over it meticulously, I think, but I never found a matching circle. The lady in black on page 9 of the red scrapbook came from the cover of the Delineator, September 1902. There are quite a few poems, articles, even cartoons that have been identified from many magazines and newspapers. In addition to some souvenirs, this page from the red scrapbook, page 23, contains a cyanotype that Montgomery took of Cape Laforce, now known as Cape Turner, near Cavendish, and a photo of Bayview Mills Farm, a settlement near Cavendish. This photo was in Prince Edward Island magazine, December 1899. There are other photos from PEI magazine on other pages in the red scrapbook. The clipping of the fringed gentian is perhaps the oldest item in the scrapbooks. It's from Godey's Lady's Book, March 1884, on the right-hand side of the page. Montgomery referred to this poem often and claimed it inspired her throughout her life, encouraging her to climb the alpine path so hard, so steep, that leads to heights sublime. This poem is embedded in a serial story called Tam, the Story of a Woman, written by Edna Rodman Church and Augusta Dubovna. And I think since they were both poets, they probably wrote this poem, although it's not attributed. Most of the fancy cards, greeting cards, and calendars in the scrapbooks were produced by Raphael Tuck and Sons of London. They are highly collectible today. These are just a few of the many periodicals represented in the 2 island scrapbooks, revealing even more about how widely read Montgomery was. As it happens, Montgomery published many stories and poems in the same periodicals during her career. In 2018, I gave a slide presentation entitled Cutting and Pasting, What Montgomery's Island Scrapbooks Reveal About Her Reading, that includes more information than I could present here today. It will be online soon on the Journal of Ella Montgomery Studies website at the University of Prince Edward Island. Christy and I collected as many of the periodicals as we could find with items that Montgomery cut and pasted into her scrapbooks, and we donated them to the Ella Montgomery Institute. And more will be added as they become available, and they can be viewed in the collection. In 2019 and 20, I prepared a table of contents for the island scrapbooks with details on all the items and all the pages. It's not been published, but is available to view at the Robertson Library at UPEI. And that is the end of the slides. Thank you so much, Ben. I'll turn it back over to Caroline, I believe.
Yes. Yay. I was just unmuting. You'll notice that I have dropped some links into the chat, including one for a presentation for the Envisioning Anne, which is on the Journal of Ellen Montgomery Studies page. And so from there, you can get to some of the other materials, and you can get to the the Ellen Montgomery Institute page at the University of PEI, which is where several of the things that Carolyn talked about have been published and are available. So thank you so much. I just love seeing those images. Those are truly remarkable. And something that I'm wondering just right off the bat is, how on earth did Ellen Montgomery get in this little tiny town on this little tiny island? How did she find the Illustrated London News? Where did that come from?
I wondered that too. I was very surprised, and I would never have come up with it except for one teensy, tiny little fragment in her scrapbooks on page 37. If you have that, you can have a look. I'll see if I can hold it up here. It's a portrait of Lady Peel. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, right at the bottom of that, Montgomery didn't quite clip the cutting exactly straight across, and there's this tiny little name under there that's, I'm not sure if I'm getting it right, but it's Umstapagas. And I thought, what? Umstapagas? What's that doing there? So I sort of had a little search for that, and eventually came up to an article about it in the Illustrated London News, and here was this picture of Lady Peel right above it. So that was an exciting day for a searcher like myself. Anyway, after I found that cutting, I decided I would try to look through some other Illustrated London News issues from that same time period, and came up with a good many more photos from there, cuttings. So that was a nice break. I'm so glad she was a little bit careless in her clipping on that particular page.
I wonder if she could have anticipated that, over 100 years later, here we all are, just loving all these images that she obviously loved, but and that we're not just loving them, but picking them apart and figuring out where they came from and wondering what it was that resonated with her. So I hope that more of you will drop some questions, comments into the chat, so that we can expand the discussion a little bit. Besides, I'm happy to just chat with Carolyn all day long, but I'd like for y'all to join in and see what y'all are thinking about and what resonated with you. I love the cards, the fact that she's putting those special cards in there. And why are they so collectible now?
Well, for one thing, they're antiques. And there are many people that collect this kind of thing. And if you go online, search for Raphael Tuck images, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of cards that his company produced over the years. These little fancy cards, I guess we'd call them calling cards perhaps, or just little gift cards, are amongst the many types of cards that she placed in her book. And I'm not sure if he's still going today. I think he might be, or the company. But anyway, just beautiful, embossed, colorful, artistic cards that I just love to look at.
Excellent, excellent. Allison Hudson, why don't you unmute your microphone and ask that question that you have dropped into or it's not really a question, but talk about some of the research you're doing on Ellen Montgomery's material culture.
Sure. I'm not very prepared, so I'm not sure what to say. I'm in my second year of a part-time PhD, so I haven't gotten very far yet, but I'm mostly working with the Emily series and other, Anne and Pat and Jane a little bit as well. And I have a copy of the scrapbooks that was reprinted in 2019, I guess it was.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really fascinating to see where some of those things came from, and it's really helpful. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, good.
I'm trying to think if I have any questions, but no, mostly I'm just where I did a close reading of the Emily trilogy, and a lot of the bits and pieces that she mentions are, it's realistic fiction, so they have counterparts in real life, and to actually see some of them, or to go to Park Corner and see the blue chest and the house itself and all of that kind of thing. It's such a combination between personally fascinating and professionally. It's hard to know where to draw the line sometimes, but
that's true.
Yeah, it's just great fun.
Good. Well, good luck on your project.
Thank you.
And do you know that they think that the New Moon house was set out on Fox Point near Maltec on Prince Edward Island?
I'd heard that, yeah.
Okay.
But the house is not there anymore, or is it?
Yes, it's there. It's privately owned, but it is still there.
Yeah, next time.
Yeah.
I got to go to PEI for the first time a year and a half ago. And
nice.
I made it to UPEI, and Simon Lloyd very graciously showed me the cotton warp quilt.
Oh,
so
good.
Work that into the thesis somehow. And yeah, there's just so much there. It's brilliant.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. So much has been collected. Any other questions?
Yes, they're popping through quickly now. So actually, Carol made a comment that the list of periodicals from which LM clipped various items gives us new sources to check for things that she probably read. So that's
Definitely.
actually a good head start for those who are interested. There's a question here. Did she keep as many scrapbooks once she had children and became busier as a minister's wife in Leaksdale and Norval?
Oh, I meant to mention that earlier. I did refer to it in the slides, but yes, she kept quite a few scrapbooks when she lived in Ontario, and they're in the Guelph University collection, and Ben has examined those pretty thoroughly. I think he can say more about them. I have some copies of the pages, but I haven't studied them as thoroughly as the island scrapbooks. So Ben, unmute.
There are 5 Ontario scrapbooks that are well, anyway. So the tricky thing is that the PEI ones, there's a red one and a blue one. Ontario ones, there are 2 red ones and 2 black ones. So bibliographically, this is a little bit complicated because we have obviously 3 red ones. The red and black, how they differ from the Prince Edward Island ones is there are way fewer visuals. There are quite a few visuals, like photographs and clippings of her honeymoon, but beyond that, it's mainly newspaper items about the community or just various things that she was interested in, as well as occasional pictures of cats. And the 5th scrapbook, besides the blue and the black, there is her scrapbook of reviews of her own books, which also includes articles that she wrote in various miscellaneous pieces and interviews and roundtables she'd appeared in. That one it's a different size as the others, and it's a 500-page scrapbook, and I think 473 of those pages are filled. So that starts in 1912 the date on the flyleaf is I think January 1912, and it begins with Kilmeny of the Orchard.
Great. She also kept baby books for her sons that are in the Guelph collection. I don't know if we call them scrapbooks, but very many details in them, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another question. On a few pages of the scrapbook, there's evidence that items have been removed. Has anyone been able to figure out what might have originally been there?
Well, it's pretty tricky. I don't think Betsy discovered any of those items that had been removed. She referred to them because they are pretty obvious, and she may have taken them out to put in her journals maybe at some point or something along those lines, but that's an avenue to explore for sure.
And another question is, will there be more of the scrapbooks published in the future?
I don't know, Ben, do you know?
Any plans for the Ontario scrapbooks?
Well, Ben has published all those reviews, right, Ben, from the scrapbooks in Guelph?
Well, my book of Montgomery's reviews, some of them were from her scrapbook, some of them were crossed, some of them I identified from the scrapbook because she doesn't identify them, because I as with you and Christy and the visuals, I found the original reviews and was able to identify the ones in the scrapbook. Well, I don't know. This is the kind of thing where I think a digital exhibit might be. I mean, the Betsy's book is great, but I don't know. But it must be very expensive to produce, given all like a lot of full color images. But I'm wondering if that might be something that that would be worthwhile to digitize. But I don't work at either the University of Guelph or the University of Prince Edward Island, so it would have to be somebody who works there who would spearhead this. But I definitely think it should be. I believe the University of Guelph did have plans to digitize a lot of its materials, but I don't think that seems to have happened so far.
As I recall, the Guelph scrapbooks are more black and white than colorful. Is that your impression?
Yeah, I think because there are fewer images. So, and of course the photographs that she would have taken. Well, I guess postcards could have been colorized, but a lot of it is simply clippings from newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
But their two newspaper clippings, I think, would be more interesting for fewer people in terms of just newspaper items from the community or from people that she knew.
Right. And the thing about the island scrapbooks is they refer to Anne of Green Gables, of course, the most popular of her books. So that's another tie-in for that collection that's not available in the Guelph collection, really.
So that actually raises the next question here in the chat, which is there seems to be layering from different time periods in some of the scrapbooks. Is that the case? And did you notice any specific pages or themes emerging if that is the case?
You talking to me? I assume.
Whoever wants to answer. Yeah.
Well, it's true. It's true that a lot of the pages in the island scrapbooks have items from different time periods, different years. Some of them have a slight theme, like the page I showed on the school, where there are write-ups of school activities in Cavendish and a picture of the Cavendish school and a couple of little jokes about the schools and so forth. And some of the early pages have items from her college days that sort of are grouped together. But then they have some floral clippings from different time periods that she pasted on. It's hard to figure out exactly what her method was. In some pages, it just seems very random. In other pages, it seems that she had a bit of a plan. So it's an exercise to go through and see if you can pinpoint the themes on the different pages. But the years vary quite a bit on some. And the Fringe Gentian, which was the poem that inspired her from Godey's Lady's book, came from 1884 issue of Godey's, which was almost 10 years before she even started her scrapbooks. So it's just hard to know how she planned it all.
Did she write about her scrapbooking in her journals?
Yes, there are 2 entries. One from July 1905 is a pretty lengthy one, and it talks about some of the items in the in the blue scrapbook. She also comments that she can't remember why she put some things in the pages. She can't remember their significance. And then there's another entry, November 1920 something. I'll see if I can find the exact date. And that was another entry, mostly about the red scrapbook. If I find, yeah, here's the date, the 22nd of November, 1926 entry. Those are the 2 entries on her scrapbook.
But she's not really, as she goes along, she's not really saying, oh, I spent a little time with the scrapbook today.
I don't recall seeing anything like that. If she has gone through those scrapbooks, she says where she was up in the attic for one of them, searching out some other material, and then sat down with the scrapbook to thumb through it, that kind of thing. So obviously they were stored in a not very convenient place to study them. But I think it's pretty obvious she was flipping through her blue scrapbook while she was either planning Anne of Green Gables or actually in the writing of it, because there's so many connections in that blue scrapbook especially that you can find in Anne. Like the yellow pansy.
I would love to imagine that her children and grandchildren looked at them with her. Do we think that happened?
I don't know that anybody has written about that. Kate McDonald may have some memory of that, but I know she kept those scrapbooks with her all of her life, in addition to most of her manuscripts for her novels, and the story and poem scrapbooks. In the 1960s, Father William Bolger and some others on Prince Edward Island contacted Stuart McDonald to see if he would allow them to buy the scrapbooks and some other, her wedding dress and several other things for the birthplace in New London, Prince Edward Island, at which he agreed to. And so they purchased those from him. And then for storage purposes, they're kept at Confederation Center of the Arts. Now, the original scrapbooks are extremely delicate. The pages are brittle. Some of the little bits of fur from the cats have disappeared. They've just fallen out along the way. And some of the dried flowers, you can imagine. But most of the items seem to still be there as she left them.
So there's a few more questions in the chat. Was scrapbooking a common pastime of women in those years? They seem to represent an enormous amount of work.
Yes, that was a common pastime, and some of the card companies like Raphael Tuck that I mentioned produced books they called scraps, and they were for people to cut out and paste in scrapbooks just for decoration. And I won't say most, but a good many of the scrapbooks from that era are just these scraps pasted in with very few mementos, maybe. But Montgomery took it in a different direction. Know that she used many of these so-called scraps that were available, but she certainly took a leaf from that book because she cut out her own scraps from these floral catalogs and so forth that she did in her scrapbooks.
Okay, and there's a few more questions about scrapbooks beyond PEI. Is there much in the scrapbooks in reference to her year in Prince Albert?
There are a few items in the blue scrapbook from friends from Prince Albert and a few cards, notation cards, but I wouldn't say a lot from Prince Albert. Ben, do you recall?
No, but as you said, if Montgomery started her scrapbooks close to around 1893, that's after Prince Albert. So she may have she may have pasted items retrospectively. Some of the articles that she published or wrote in Prince Albert are in one of her earliest scrapbooks of her own periodical pieces, though.
Right. On Cape LaForce, her first one is in there, and a good many of her essays and stories that were published in her college years in Halifax are in that first scrapbook.
And then another question is about whether she pasted any articles about World War I in the Ontario scrapbook, since she talked about it so much in her journal. I guess that
I'm sure she did, but I can't pinpoint them for you. But Ben may have a memory of those.
I haven't. To be honest, I haven't looked that carefully at that aspect of them. I'm sorry, I don't really know. But she did publish a lot of photographs and cards from her honeymoon in one of her Ontario scrapbooks.
I do remember an article about Colonel Sharp and his outfit in the war, because he lived in Uxbridge, which is close to Leesdale. And I think there are a few items related to him, but I can't remember much else in those scrapbooks related to World War I. Whoever's in Guelph, go look.
I see Mary-Ev has her hand up. So if you want to unmute, Mary-Ev, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a comment. Carolyn, it's so nice to see you and Beth. I can never think of one of you without the other. You're like Alec and Alonzo. You're always together. So
thanks, Mary-Ev. It's good to see you too, my dear.
Anyone else have questions? You can just pop in, and I will say Joanne is here on the call, so if you want to ask her something about it too. Hi, Joanne. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, feel free to unmute and just ask.
I will say one more thing about researching these stories. I found an awful lot online. You do have to look around a bit, because it's not too obvious sometimes from just Googling a title. But there are several websites that have digitized a lot of these old magazines and papers and so forth. The Library of Congress in the United States has done some. Happy Trust is a great website for a lot of these magazines. And the floral catalogs I've located just from looking at Google Images for John Lewis Giles, and a whole bunch will pop up, and occasionally I'll get lucky and see one I recognize. And then they are also digitized on archive.org, and a few on the Smithsonian Institution website. So if you want to look at these things in context online, it can be done in many places.
I always wonder if Rhea looks down and thinks, man, they have it so easy now.
Oh, the time she spent in libraries just sitting in the stacks, sitting on the floor with all these books around her, looking through them just page by page to try to find something, is just astounding. A gift to all of us that she did that.
Yes, indeed. We are coming up on our last 3 minutes. The hosts will stay on probably for another 30 minutes or so that we can chat and talk more informally. But I see Lisa Anderson has, she still has her alumni library card from the University of Guelph, you lucky thing. So yes, if you're in the area, just, go and look for all of us, take some pictures, post them for us. Any other questions for Carolyn before we go to our informal time? Thank you so much, Carolyn, for your time and all the work that you have put in, not just for this presentation, but on all the Ellen Montgomery studies. We are so grateful to all of you who do that kind of work.
Well, it's a labor of love, I think, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks to everybody for joining in today. It's been fun to see so many friends and familiar faces. As I say, without masks, it's a treat.
Yes.
And wish everybody well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And again, feel free to stay on. We will have informal chat time for a little bit after the official meeting is over. And again, we will make this recording available at some point in the relatively near future. If you are wondering how to get in touch with us, I will drop into the chat a link to the Conversations About Ellen Montgomery page, which is housed on Ben's Ellen Montgomery online page. And that way you can sign up to get email newsletters and alerts and see what we've done in the past, get some of those older recordings, and continue with us into the future, and give us suggestions if you have ideas for what you'd like to talk about in future meetings. So, thus ends our formal presentation. Thank you all so much for your questions, your time. We will end the recording and we can then start chatting.